She had a rule about noticing things she wasn't supposed to notice, and at the top of that list was the way Dunbar watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. Solene had gotten good at cataloguing the world from her peripheral vision. 4 years inside the most controlled silence she had ever encountered had trained her that way. She kept her eyes on the numbers. She kept her mouth on what mattered. She kept her opinions about Dunbar's other business, the kind that didn't show up on any filing with the IRS. Locked behind a wall of professional indifference she had been constructing since the week he hired her. She had been 26 and 6 months out of a job that had quietly eliminated itself when the company folded. She had grown up in Terre Haute with a mother who spent money faster than she could earn it, and a stepfather who treated the household like a ledger he could cook whenever the real numbers became inconvenient. Solene had learned early that figures were honest in a way people weren't. You could see a lie in a balance sheet from 3 pages away. She had been good at finding them, good enough that someone inside Dunbar's organization had noticed. She still didn't know who had flagged her resume. She had never asked. You didn't ask questions like that when you understood the shape of the place you were walking into. 4 years later, she sat in an office on the 31st floor of a building that did not technically belong to Dunbar but functionally did. And she kept the books for a man whose real operation was something 3 separate federal agencies would have paid considerably for the privilege of understanding. She had never asked for specifics. She understood the architecture of it without needing the blueprint. She understood the shell companies, the layered trusts, the holding entities registered across 4 states and 1 offshore jurisdiction that she had named, structured, and stress-tested herself. She had built the cage. She was the only one who knew every door. It was Tuesday afternoon when she decided to leave at 5. Not 5:30, not the usual whatever it takes. 5 o'clock because she had told Aaron she would meet him at the wine bar by the river at 5:30, and Aaron Page had a specific rule about waiting. More than 15 minutes and he left. No apology, no rescheduling until you called first. It was one of the things she liked about him. Clear expectations, no games, no one standing behind her watching the door. She gathered her things with the efficiency she brought to everything. Coat, bag, the slim notebook she used for shorthand that no one else on earth could read, and walked to the threshold of Dunbar's office. He was on the phone. He was always on the phone. He stood at the window the way he always stood at windows, like a man surveying something he owned, which in many cases he did. He was 41 and built like someone who had spent a significant portion of his life in circumstances that required physical endurance and left physical records. There was a scar that ran along his left jawline and disappeared under his collar. In 4 years, she had never asked about it. She had made a principle of not asking about the things that would make him feel understood. He glanced over his shoulder and held up a finger. She waited. She was patient when patience cost her nothing. He finished the call. He set the phone on the credenza behind his desk, with the deliberate care of a man always aware of where his hands were. "You're leaving." Not a question, but not neutral either. There was something compressed at the corner of his mouth that she had trained herself not to read too carefully. 5 o'clock, Solene said. The Marchetti restructuring documents are tabbed on your desk. The yellow tabs are the pages that need signatures. The blue ones are for reference only. Don't sign the blue ones. The city assessor's callback is scheduled Thursday at 2. If Halverson calls before then about the warehouse liens, the answer is no, and he already knows it. Dunbar looked at her. "I have a personal appointment," she said, because the silence was clearly waiting for it. The compression at his mouth didn't move. "Since when do you have personal appointments on Tuesdays?" "Since always," she said. "I just usually reschedule them." A pause. He turned back to the window. "Fine. Lock the lower files before you go." "Already done." She left. The wine bar was called Wicklow, and it was the kind of place designed for people who were exhausted. Low ceilings, dark wood, candlelight warm enough to be kind without being romantic. Solene had found it on her own 2 years ago, and had never once brought anyone from work here. It was hers, clean, separate, untouched by the 31st floor. Aaron was already at the corner table when she arrived, standing before she reached him, which was the old-fashioned habit she had teased him about in college and quietly stopped teasing him about around year 2, when it stopped being funny and became something she looked forward to without letting herself look at why. He taught high school music in Wicker Park 5 days a week. On Saturdays, he ran a program for kids from low-income neighborhoods through a city arts grant. $60 an hour, hand-illustrated handouts, a room that smelled like rosin and old carpet. He played guitar badly and cooked badly, and had an enormous, deeply opinionated dog named Senate, who had destroyed 3 couch cushions and counting. He poured her wine before she had her coat off. "You look like you've been awake since 1987, he said. "Thank you, Aaron. That's very restorative to hear." "I mean it generously." "I know you do." She took a sip. It was good. She let herself feel it without analyzing why she needed to. "How's Senate?" "Annihilated the 3rd set of cushions. I think he's staging a protest." "About what?" "His feelings, probably. He has a lot of them." She laughed, the kind that surprised her on the way out, louder than she intended, genuine in a way she hadn't managed all day. Aaron refilled her glass and told her about a student who had composed an original piece for the spring recital and refused to let anyone hear it until the night of, and she listened and ate and let the 31st floor get very far away. At some point, he reached across the table and pushed back a strand of hair that had escaped her clip. She let him. It was easy the way things with Aaron were always easy, uncalculated, unhurried, no angles. She did not notice the black SUV idling at the curb across the street. She wasn't looking for it. She found out 6 days later, the way she found everything, in the numbers. Wednesday evening, the quarterly consolidated expense report open on her second monitor. She was running line items against the master ledger, the way she did every quarter, methodically, the way her stepfather had once gone through coat pockets, looking for money he could claim was his, looking for the thing that didn't fit. The entry was on page 9, a property acquisition, a residential building on Cortlandt Avenue in Wicker Park, routed through a trust she recognized the moment her eyes landed on it, Praxis Real Estate Holdings, one of Dunbar's quieter shells. She had built it herself, 2 years prior, for exactly this kind of acquisition. She knew its architecture the way she knew her own handwriting. She scrolled up. The acquisition date was the previous Thursday. She sat with that. Then she opened the secondary disbursement records, then the trust transaction logs. Then, because she was thorough in the way that had kept her employed and solvent and not arrested, she pulled the City Arts Board's public grant registry, which she had no prior reason to access, and which took her 4 minutes to locate. A Saturday music education program, grant rescinded, administrative review pending, the same week. Her hands went still on the keyboard. She pulled Aaron's last text, still unread in the part of her phone she kept separate from work contacts. Thursday morning. "Hey, landlord called about some lease irregularity. Probably nothing, I'll sort it." She had replied that she was available if he needed help. He hadn't responded. She had assumed he was fine. She had told herself he was fine. She went into the university adjunct directory next, found after 20 minutes of quiet navigation through systems she had no formal access to but moved through anyway, a memo from the provost's office, departmental restructuring, adjunct positions in the music faculty consolidated, effective immediately. She looked at the date, looked at the grant rescission, looked at the Praxis acquisition. Thursday, Friday. The same 3 days after she had sat across from Aaron in a candlelit bar and laughed until her shoulders dropped. She printed 1 page. The Praxis entry, highlighted yellow, the same yellow she used when Dunbar was missing something obvious in his own financials. She closed every other window. She locked her screen. She knocked on his office door once, a formality, not a request, and walked in. He was at his desk, reading. He looked up with the calm attention of a man accustomed to her walking in unannounced and not minding it. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, a glass of whiskey on the coaster to his right that hadn't been touched long enough for the ice to have fully melted. Solene walked to the center of the room and put the paper on the desk in front of him, face up, the yellow stripe facing out. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. Something shifted in the muscles along his jaw. Not a flinch, not quite, but the nearest thing to one she had ever seen from him. He didn't look up. Praxis picked up a residential building in Wicker Park, Solene said. Her voice was level. She had spent a long time in the restroom ensuring it would be. Last Thursday. Real estate is. Aaron Page lives in that building. She watched his hands go flat on the desk. He also lost his arts grant this week, and his adjunct contract, in the same 72-hour window, all of it traceable through accounts and contacts that run directly through this office. The silence was absolute. He touched your hand, Dunbar said, still not looking at her. The simplicity of it, the flatness, the complete and total absence of apology, was almost something she could have respected under different circumstances. His name is Aaron Page, she said. He teaches teenagers to read sheet music on Saturday mornings. He has a dog that he loves more than he should. He is not a threat to your operation. He is not a threat to anything that exists in this building or anywhere near it. I know what he is. Then you know what you did had nothing to do with the operation. Dunbar's eyes came up. They were the color of winter water, gray and very still on the surface, with something beneath that she had spent 4 years not looking at directly. Right now they were not still. He had his hands on you, he said. Quita. The same words but different in register. Like the first time had been a statement, and this was something closer to a confession. He's been my friend for 11 years. Something in her chest was tightening in a way she recognized and didn't trust. She kept her footing. You had me followed on my own time. You watched me have dinner with someone, and then you picked up the phone and spent 4 days dismantling his life using 3 different shell structures that I built. I built them. My architecture, used against someone I brought into the radius of this office by simply existing near it. He said nothing. You do not own me, Solene said. Something moved across his face that she had no category for. He stood. He was a large man, and the office was not a small room, but when he stood and came around the desk, it contracted. She held her ground the way she always held it, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had long since decided that fear was information, not instruction. Solene. Leith. She watched him stop. It was the first time she had used his given name in 4 years. His actual name, the one she had been careful to avoid because names were a form of proximity, and she had always understood where proximity led in a building, like this one. She watched it land on him with the precision of something she had been saving. Don't tell me it was for my protection, she said quietly. Don't tell me it was business. You watched me laugh at something he said, and the next morning you made a phone call. That isn't control. That's a sickness wearing a very expensive suit. He didn't deny it. That was the part she hadn't prepared for. Not the anger, not the cold executive deflection, not even the quiet threat she had half expected. The fact that he stood there and let the truth of it sit in the air between them, without reaching for the nearest exit. I'm resigning, Solene said. Transition documentation by Friday. I'll sign whatever the lawyers need. I won't accept it. It isn't a negotiation. She picked up her bag from the visitor's chair. I know exactly where everything is buried in these accounts, Leith. Figuratively and otherwise. You won't move against me because you're not irrational. I won't take anything to anyone because I'm not suicidal. We have always understood each other perfectly. That understanding survives this conversation. She walked to the door. You're walking outside my protection, he said behind her. Not a threat. The voice of a man who had just realized how little that phrase meant. She stopped, looked at him over her shoulder. He was standing in the center of the rug, one hand at his side, the other gripping the back of the chair, and he looked, for the first time in 4 years, like a man who did not know what came next. "I've been outside your protection since the day I walked in," she said. "I just never told you." She walked out. She expected retaliation. She had prepared for it. A clean resume in a separate email account, 3 months of savings in a bank that had no connection to anything with Dunbar's name anywhere near it, the number of an attorney in Lincoln Park who specialized in complicated situations and asked very few questions. The retaliation didn't come. Her accounts weren't touched. No one appeared at her door. His lawyers did not call. The silence was so complete she didn't know what to do inside it. She interviewed at a logistics firm in River North, a private wealth management group in the Loop, a small family office in Evanston that paid significantly less and had never, to her knowledge, arranged for anyone's lease to be terminated as a romantic gesture. She received 2 offers. She accepted neither. She sat on her couch on a Thursday night, the city quiet outside her window, the kind of quiet that was supposed to feel like freedom, and understood very slowly that she had no idea what to do with freedom when it arrived without stakes attached. She had spent 4 years inside the pressure of Dunbar's world, the constant low-frequency hum of controlled danger, the weight of carrying information that could dismantle a man in an afternoon, the particular closeness of being the only person in a room full of people with weapons who was trusted with the actual truth. She had called it a job. She had called it a salary. She had called it a lot of things. She was running out of names for it. Her phone rang at 10:17, unknown number. She answered because unknown numbers from restricted lines were a category she had learned not to ignore. Ms. Grady. Walt Dunbar's driver, a quiet man she had always respected because he never once pretended to be something he wasn't. His voice had a strain in it she hadn't heard before. "I'm sorry to call." "What is it, Walt?" "The Marek accounts, the offshore restructuring you ran 2 years ago." A pause that told her more than the words that followed. "There's a play happening. Someone found a gap in the transfer documentation, a filing window that wasn't closed. The exposure is significant. Nobody here has the access to fix it. He's been in his office for 6 hours, and he won't let anyone in." She stared at her kitchen wall. She knew exactly where the gap was. She had flagged it internally, a detail she had meant to resolve and hadn't, because she had been walking out the door with her resignation before she could close it. Her own oversight. She had left it open and walked away. "How significant," she said. Walt told her. She put on her coat. The 31st floor was dark except for the light under his office door. The bullpen was empty. Everyone sent home, which meant the situation was real, and he had been managing it alone for longer than Walt had implied. She didn't knock. He was at the desk, not the window. The desk with documents spread out around him, and his laptop open to the offshore trust interface she recognized from the inside out. He had been trying to close the gap himself. He didn't have her credentials. The access was structured to require them. She had built it that way, a failsafe she had installed for herself without ever telling him it existed. He looked up when she came in. He looked like a man who had not slept and had decided not to care about that. He looked like whatever war he usually managed had been running on its own for too long without supervision. He looked at her the way you look at something you have convinced yourself you don't need and have needed the entire time. He said nothing. Solene sat at the satellite desk in the corner, her workspace, the one she had claimed quietly 2 years ago and which had been left exactly as she'd arranged it. She pulled out her laptop. She logged into the trust interface with her credentials and spent the next hour and 20 minutes doing what she did, which was locating the gap and closing it, and leaving no evidence that it had ever existed. When she was done, she shut the laptop. "Marek is clean," she said. "The window is sealed. No one got through." "I know." He had been watching her the entire time, she was certain of it. "I could see the status in real time." "Then you know it's finished." Solene. She looked at him across the room, the scar along his jaw, the hands flat on the desk. the exhaustion that lived behind the grey eyes like a permanent resident who had given up apologizing for the inconvenience. Aaron Page, Dunbar said. The name like it cost him something measurable. The grant, the apartment, the teaching position. He held her gaze without flinching from what was in it. It'll be reversed, all of it. Through channels that won't trace back to anything he can find. He won't know who did it. She looked at him for a long moment. And the next time someone sits across from me at dinner, she said, what happens then? There won't be a next time. Not a promise made to placate her. The voice of a man who had sat alone for 6 hours with the specific consequences of his own behavior and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Because I'm not willing to do this again, any of it. The room was very quiet. Solene stood. She crossed the Persian rug until she was standing in front of his desk, close enough to see the exact texture of his exhaustion, the way it had settled into the lines around his eyes, like something built up over years rather than days. She put her hands flat on the desk and leaned in until the professional distance she had maintained for 4 years was no longer a distance at all. Just 2 people in a room at 10:30 at night, with the city indifferent outside the glass, and all the careful walls between them, lying in pieces on the floor. I don't work for you, she said. I know. I won't work for you, not the way I did before. She held his gaze. But I built the Marek accounts. They're mine. I'll maintain them. He was completely still. And in exchange, she said, Aaron Page gets everything back by Monday. His grant, his lease, his contract. Anonymously. Untraceable back to this office. She paused. And you tell me when you have someone follow me. Before, not after. You tell me when you're about to make a decision that enters my personal life. If you can't do that, she held the pause until it had the weight she needed. I have the full Marek documentation in a place that has nothing to do with this building. I have had it for 2 years. I kept it because I'm not a liability and because I didn't want to use it. But I will. Something moved through his expression that she recognized, finally as a man understanding the full shape of the person across from him for the first time. You built your exit before you ever walked in, he said. I build exits into everything, she said. It's how I work. He stood. He was close now, closer than the desk should have allowed, and she had stopped tracking the distance somewhere in the last 10 minutes because it had ceased to matter. Tell me to back up, he said quietly, and I will. She looked at him, at the scar, at the hands that had not moved toward her and were waiting for her to decide, at the man who had dismantled someone's life out of something so tangled and irrational that it looked, from a certain angle, almost like grief. Don't, she said, just don't. He understood the difference. He raised his hand slowly and settled it against the side of her face, and she felt the weight of it, the roughness of it, the specific, careful deliberateness of a man touching something he has been terrified to touch. She didn't pull away. I'm still angry with you, Solene said. I know. Aaron gets the full grant amount back, plus whatever he lost in income during the gap. Done. And you're going to stop having Walt send you reports about where I go on my own time. His jaw tightened. Done. She held his gaze for one more moment, reading him the way she read everything, looking for the thing that didn't fit, for the gap in the structure. She didn't find one. She found instead the thing she had trained herself for 4 years not to look at directly, the fact that he had never once in the entire time she had worked for him looked at anyone else the way he looked at her. Not with calculation, not with use, with something closer to the specific helplessness of a man who had spent 41 years being in control of every variable in his life, and had finally encountered one he couldn't account for. She kissed him first. She had decided to. Somewhere in the hour and 20 minutes she had spent repairing what his absence of discipline had nearly cost both of them. She did it deliberately, without hesitation, because she had already made the decision, and Solene Grady did not second-guess decisions she had already made. He kissed her back like a man who had been waiting longer than he knew, with a care that was somehow more honest than anything else he had ever shown her. When they pulled apart, the city burned quietly through the bulletproof glass behind him, enormous and indifferent. She rested her forehead against his jaw, and he held her with the careful steadiness of a man who had decided not to let go. "You're impossible," she said very quietly. "You came back," he said, "so what does that make you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Solene Grady had grown up understanding that the most dangerous document in any room was the one that told the truth about who owed what to whom. She had spent 4 years building Dunbar's architecture, structuring his secrets, closing his gaps. She had told herself it was just a job. She had told herself she was just good at it. She was good at it. But she had also, without ever deciding to, built herself into the foundation of something she couldn't separate herself from, without bringing the whole structure down. She had thought she was holding the ledger. It turned out the ledger had been holding her. She had called it a cage once, standing in his office with her bag over her shoulder and her resignation on his blotter. Maybe she had been right, but standing here now, in the wreckage of 4 years of professional distance, she understood something that the numbers had never been able to tell her. The cage and the shelter were the same structure. What mattered was who held the key. She did. She always had. Was that a choice? Or was it the oldest kind of trap? The one you build yourself, so perfectly fitted to your own shape that you don't notice it until you've already decided you don't want to leave. Tell us what you think in the comments.